Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are, whoever you are, and welcome once again to Anime Octane, the show in which we, the folks at Nerd Caliber, take a look at a recent piece of anime, series, or movie, and we talk about it in depth, like we do on our full fat spoiler chat, except this is specifically devoted to anime. So we talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it, if any of those two things, and also what the messages are, what the storytellers are trying to send us home with, basically. And this week we are talking about the current anime movie that is on Netflix, Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway. So as we say to people who are watching us on the Full Fat Spoiler Chat show, there will be spoilers here, so if you have not seen Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, and you don't like spoilers, you should probably be watching something else. If you have seen it or you don't mind spoilers, hang around. Let us know what you think in the chat of our opinions, of your own opinions. What did you think of the show if you've watched it or the movie? And we'll get started. I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber. First-person shooter on Facebook as a cosplay photographer. Maybe again someday. Cons. And Burley _ Adopter on Twitter and a couple of other places, mostly as a tech journalist. Joining me tonight is our anime stalwart and many other stalwart things. Byron, introduce yourself.
Hello, Byron McNeil, aka Byron D0 on multiple facets of the interwebs. Contributing writer for Nerd Caliber, content creator, social media specialists, I guess. I wear a bunch of different hats for the site, and I'm excited to talk about some anime here. If you want to see some of the other stuff I do, I pride myself in my art. So if you want to watch me do some drawings and talk about life, the universe, and everything, you can join me on the Byron's D0 channel on YouTube. That's BYRONDZERO.
Cool. And so let's talk about. Let's welcome some people. Mina Ashido, welcome to the chat on YouTube. Riley Redmond. Sorry, I don't read Arabic, so I don't know who you are or what you said, but welcome. And again, throw the warning out there. We're going to be spoiling this movie. Take a quick roundabout our other social medias. Things that anybody else need to welcome. Alrighty. And once again, Ratan, welcome to the show. Again, sorry, don't read it, so I don't know what you said, but hopefully it was something wonderful. And again, the warning that we are going to be spoiling the movie Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway. So what we do is we always start by talking about what this is and where it came from. And this is going to be... So I always try to keep this pretty short. And I will do that with this. But boy, is it going to be tough. This is a deep and incredibly complicated canon of work.
Understatement of the year.
Yeah. This is probably as complicated as the Fate series. And if you know how complicated that is, you know what you're in for. But
I don't know if I say it's that complicated.
Yeah, it's that's probably true. Although you got to think when you add in all of the novels, all of the manga, all of the games. And boy, have there been games.
Yeah.
And then all the toys. No. Anyway.
I haven't dabbled in the toys, but that's not what we're here for.
Exactly. So, Mobile Suit Gundam is an anime series that launched in April of 1979, ran for one surprisingly truncated season. Supposed to go 56 episodes that got cut down to 43. It was going to go less than that, but the staff actually convinced the studio to give them a few more. And
created by Yoshiaka Tomino, also known as Kill 'Em All Tomino.
And shepherded for the most part throughout the remaining 40 plus years um,
Mm-hmm.
by Tomino or Tomino-san or
Yes. Tomio Sensei.
Tomino Sensei. So the show was initially canceled. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and during its run, near the end of its run, Bandai bought the rights to make toys based on the show. Bandai put out the very first Gunpla model kit, um, which was one of the Gundams or the Gundam,
Yes.
um, and that changed the universe. That's not an exaggeration, folks.
No.
That changed the toy world completely, particularly in Japan, but everywhere else. It changed the anime world. It's fair to say that there were mecha shows before this, but Gundam made mecha the dominant anime form for probably 15 or 20 years.
And I think one thing that people that at least not many people appreciate is that Gundam was initially meant to be a deconstruction of the mecha genre during that time period.
Uh, um,
Well, I mean, before that, you had like shows like Getter Robo
right.
and the Mazinger franchise,
Uh,
where you knew who the bad guys were and you knew who the good guys were.
So yeah, so without going into too much depth about that, the previous history, what Tomino-san did is he put this idea of giant pilot-driven mobile battle suits, mechs, in an incredibly realistic science fiction world, with realistic and often very disturbing human motivations, political motivations. This is The Expanse 30 years before The Expanse was even thought of as a book series. Um, it
I could. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'd also like to point out that where the deconstruction part comes in is that you almost always every Gundam protagonist has always been a young man or a youthful pilot, which again is a deconstruction of what was done in like previous Super Robot shows
Yeah.
in the past.
Well, yeah, in the very first Gundam, that is the case. It kind of falls back into that trope in many, many further follow-on series. But,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess you could say he deconstructed it in the sense that, yeah, the hero isn't always necessarily a hero, or certainly doesn't always do things that would qualify him as a hero. The villain is not particularly villainous. It's a protagonist and an antagonist, and even then, it's kind of hard to say which is which in most cases in these series in a certain timeline. So here's the one other thing that has to be clarified about this. There's almost never been more than a couple of year period in which there wasn't at least one anime and or a movie about Gundams being made in this franchise. The problem is there are a ton of them, probably at least 50%, if not slightly more, that are in different timelines than the original Mobile Suit Gundam and many of its sequels, including Hathaway, the one we're talking about today. That is what's called the Universal Century,
Agree.
or UC timeline. It takes place, so it's, this one is currently set in UC 105. The idea is that the Universal Century kicks off when humanity really started in a big way going out into colonies in space. And so many of the other Gundam series are, they have their own separate timelines. Things happened a little differently.
Yes.
One of them, the idea is that the Earth domination of space colonies lasted for hundreds of years before any one of them decided to break off and become an independent thing. Another one, like the only other Mobile Suit Gundam series I've watched, Iron-Blooded Orphans, the primary colonies are on Mars, and it takes place at some point in what's called the post-disaster universe. I don't even recall if they define a whole lot about what the disaster was. So, there are at least a half a dozen or more separate timelines, but the one that this movie is set in is the one that the original Mobile Suit Gundam was set in,
Yes.
the Universal Century. And this character is. I don't think he actually appears in the first one. His dad is a character in the
Yes.
first one. He appears in the movies that
Yes.
finish up his the storyline, the original storyline that his father is in. A secondary character, an important but secondary character in the first series.
Yes.
His father is. He is a very important character in Zeta Gundam, which is the next anime series after those movies that wrap up the first one came out.
Hmm.
And he is Hathaway Noah,
Yes. Hathaway Noah.
son of Bright Noah, who you meet in literally the very first episode of the first series.
The commander of White Base.
Yes. Again, we don't need to go into that. That's stuff that doesn't affect this series. And this tells the story of Hathaway Noah coming to Earth. And again, we're spoiling things here. Spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. We find out that he is, in fact, a leader of a terrorist organization, generally just called Mafti. And he is Mafti Navwe Aaron, I think is the name he goes by.
Yes.
And his goal is actually kind of the opposite of what his father and his father's, compatriots, including even right in the first one, the young man, Amuro Ray, didn't know anything. He was a young guy and didn't know anything about mechs when he took over the first Gundam. But they are all on the Earth Federation side. So the Earth Federation, basically, it's Earth and all the colonies. The Moon, all of the space colonies. And the story of the first Gundam is that an independent colony breaks out, the Principality of Zeon, and that starts the whole conflict. The guy on the Zeon side, Char Aznavour, which wonderful things you learn when you dig down into Wikipedia, is that he is actually named after the French singer and actor Charles Aznavour.
Oh wow!
Yeah, Tomino-san has actually said that, confirmed it. So that character, one of his goals is to get as many people off Earth and into the colonies, not just to expand the colonies and expand, potentially the power of Zeon, but Earth is overpopulated. That's why the colonies started, and he believes that it is dying, and that's his goal, to get people off. And ultimately, his goal is it elevates to the point where, if he can't get people to get off, then if he drops a literal life killer asteroid, Earth will recover, and everybody, all humans will be living in space. That is not the specific goal of Hathaway. He is a terrorist who is engaged in acts of terror against the Earth Federation government, which apparently, after it allowed Zeon to come back into the fold of the Federation, has gotten pretty nationalistic, I guess would be a good way to put it.
Yeah, that would be a nice way to put it.
Like forcibly exporting poor people and what they call undesirables out to the space colonies. And that's the world that Hathaway Noah, call him Neo. It's a slip of the tongue there. Is involved in this series. So, given that with the background, and the other thing that we need to say is, it turns out this is the first in 3 movies. This will be a 3-movie trilogy, which is important when we get talking about certain aspects of it. So, Byron, what did you like about this? What worked for you? What do you think they were going for and actually hit?
I really love the animation, first and foremost. yes, top notch. The like the arts, like the way the combination of the art style, which was definitely peak Gundam in my opinion, like peak UC Gundam. Like we're talking like 0083 War in the Pocket, which is another one I highly recommend you guys watch it just for the heck of it. It's like it has like that traditional anime aesthetic to it, but it feels so human at the same time. And I love the mech designs. Personally, I like a I like Gundam. I like my Gundams to have like a bunch of different styles so that I can tell one from the other.
I
I
get
like
that. That makes
yeah.
sense.
Mm,
I'm gonna have something to say about that later on as well, but I agree.
yes. Um, I like the characterizations because one thing that has always been us that has always drawn me towards the Gundam franchise is the fact that these are real war stories. They're not inherently about good versus evil, and you definitely get that in this conflict because you have the agents of Mafty who they want to preserve the Earth, but they're not against killing civilians in order to do it. And then you have the Earth Federation, which at one like in the original series they were the good guys for most of it, and now they're kind of they're kind of gross.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yes. And speaking of gross, I I I I actually love this part. The I cannot remember the commanding officer's name, but like the one that was hitting on GG the entire time.
So in the image that just popped up there, folks, that's the guy standing up, Kenneth Slegg or
Yes.
Steg, Slegg.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how how layered his character was because you're kind of led to believe that he's like kind of foppish and devil may care about everything, but when he figures out who Hathaway really is, it, it's kind of like, oh, so he knew what he was doing the entire time, and
Yep.
it definitely made him a fascinating character. Um, I kind of had a like I like Hathaway's characterization, and this is coming from someone that watched him in Char's counterattack when he was just a simpering fan. He was just a simpering little pup chasing after a girl, and now he's like the leader of this movement. And while he still has reservations, this whole I like how this development is developing him is allowing him to develop his resolve to to do what he feels needs to be done.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know that. So it's only a 90-minute movie, and I don't know that anybody in it could be described as having any character growth yet. Although Hathaway, particularly if you're familiar with his character from way back when, um, that is a huge amount of character growth. And this only takes place less than 20 years, 15 years after the events of the last time you saw him. Um,
Yeah, Char's counterattack.
yeah, and counterattack. So Char's counterattack. So he's still a young man because he was basically a teenager in Char's counterattack.
Yes.
So yeah, there's a great deal of growth there, but again, it's not so much in set in this particular one movie.
Well, yeah, he was I just find it interesting because in Char's counterattack, he was outrageously jealous of Char because he basically had bewitched the object of his affection, Quest Pariah, who even though she had a cameo, I still found myself groaning at her. I'm just like,
And that is one that there are some cameos of people from previous movies and series as flashbacks. Um, for the most part, not completely, but a lot of it is like he has a flashback. There's a flashback that features Amuro Ray, and that Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
uh, that's the bulk of my positives for this movie.
All right. So I agree 100% about the animation. I think that both the animation, the character design, the mech designs, everything about the world, about the animation is wonderful. I had this image up here of the three main characters. So that's Hathaway in the blue jacket to the left of the screen, Captain Kenneth, as they call him, or Commander Kenneth, in his uniform, who's standing up, just obviously joining them as they are having breakfast, and that's Gigi and Lucia on the right, and those are the three primary characters in this story. If you look at this, this is in the commissary on the Earth Federation Forces Air Base in Davao, Philippines. And, I don't know that it looks like that. I don't know that there is one first, it's Earth Federation, but I don't know any base particularly looks like that. But boy, it looks exactly like any kind of air base cafeteria or, small airfield cafeteria, whatever you want to call it, that I've ever seen. The backgrounds are perfect. The composition, the compositing of, the actual main character animation, the near background, the far background, and so on is just gorgeous. I think in anime that's the job of the person they call director of photography, and the director of photography on this is Win. But even just the character animations. So this is the movie starts. Let me show you. These people are obviously seated in something. It's a very, as you can tell by the seats, very high end shuttle that's bringing them from the moon to Earth. And a lot of the people that it's bringing from the moon to the Earth are very, VIP cabinet members, basically. And a group hijacks the shuttle, claiming to be members of, or claiming this guy claims specifically to be MAFTI, and that they are all members of MAFTI. They do kill people, you can see from the blood in the shuttle, and then basically, without necessarily giving himself away, Hathaway starts stopping them with the help of Kenneth and so on. But they wind up, he winds up getting a gun, killing a couple of them. And like even in this shot, so this is Hathaway about to shoot one of the fake MAFTI members. Another one is in the background, you can see there, with his gun up. And you can already see from just this one screen clip that Kenneth is about to step out of his seat and tackle that guy. And that's what happens. So in a lot of anime where you don't have the budget to do multiple character movements all the time, you often wind up with like quick cuts to maybe, a close-up of Kenneth's foot coming out or something like that. Not this. This is movie-like,
Yes.
live-action film movie-like in its cinematography. The voice acting is fine. I watched the subtitle as I always do. I would assume that the English dub is fine as well.
Yeah, I watched the dub simply because that's how I've always enjoyed most of my UC stuff. So and it was definitely on par with what I've with the standard that I've come to know in the Gundam franchise.
Yeah. The character writing was very interesting. I would normally find a character like Gigi really annoying.
Well,
Um,
you mean we're not you mean you don't like the bubbly, in your face girls?
well, the bubbly in your face girl who seems to be pretending that she has a secret, except in this case, I'm pretty sure she does.
Mm.
And so that's kept me very interested in her part of the story. It again, it's set squarely in a logical advancement of that future Earth and space, and they play it up beautifully. Um, One of the things that comes up is there's apparently a bunch of these all around the world. People or groups that call themselves associated with MAFTI but really aren't. Um, but one of them in this town called Wimbelly in northern Australia is apparently so large and effective that it's drawn the attention of the Earth Federation forces, and which means it has to draw the attention of the actual MAFTI organization, Hathaway's
Yep.
group. And just again, the series is about politics. It's about people, and it's about their choices and their difficult choices and their stories and so on. But its politics is, you know, like I said, on par with The Expanse. It's fantastic.
Yes.
Um, Now, as somebody who has not seen any of the previous Universal Century stuff, I literally just started watching like the first episode of the original Mobile Suit Gundam after watching Hathaway because I was so fascinated by this world that Tomino had created. Um, that the question would come up is this attainable to somebody who isn't like deeply familiar with Gundam in general and specifically Universal Century? And I had no problem with it. It does a pretty good job of telling you the important things you need to know and teasing enough of that that you kind of go, gosh, that sounds like an interesting story. I'd like to go back and find out
Mm-hmm.
about that. Like how Hathaway essentially, under his father's nose, stole a Gundam in Zeta. Um, and he explains a little bit about the fallout of that and what that meant for both him and his family and so on in this. I didn't know that. I hadn't watched that anime. And so I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. That's interesting. And again, I was like, it sounds like it might be an interesting story. Uh, so you don't need to. Now, it will help. Having gone on and read a bunch of the plot synopses and so on, yeah, it's going to help quite a bit if you are familiar with the original Gundam and all of the stuff that's happened in the Universal Centuries timeline. But you won't be completely lost. You'll be able to enjoy it for what it is. A very smartly written mecha hard science fiction. And that's one of the things I love about this. And I guess I'd say I have to apply that to all of, the Universal Century stuff. Pretty much all the Gundam stuff.
I will say one thing, like if you ever do decide to take the plunge into UC, one thing that might take you out of it is the concept of the new type.
Well, so when I say hard science fiction, that doesn't mean that there can't be some sort of completely out there element that comes into a hard science fiction. Again, The Expanse is like that. It's a hard science fiction universe that explores what would happen if people sort of in secret got their hands on alien technology and used it to, advance a war. In the Gundam thing, the fantasy element comes in that there are starting to appear an evolution of humans that have mild psychic abilities, and I mean mild. We're not; these aren't like Professor X or Jean Grey or anything like that. At best, they're, you know, somewhat telepathic with sometimes some other of these new types.
Yes. Yeah, I was gonna say I would liken it to Nicolas Cage's power in the movie Next.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them are like that. Some of them are more just straight up telepathic. But in a lot of cases, what it's used as a way to integrate into the control system, the AI control system of a Gundam,
Yes.
and make them much more effective. Um, but the space colonies are O'Neill cylinders. They're all arranged at the Lagrange points, the stable gravitational points around the Earth-Moon system. They are, perfect O'Neill cylinders. Portrayed. Gravity's on the outside, rotating in the cylinder. The core goes through. Obviously, is zero or microgravity. It's zero G. I know it's not. It's technically microgravity, but come on. If it really can't affect you in any way except for over the course of maybe centuries, if you're just drifting, it's zero G. So yeah, that's another thing. I really love the hard science fiction aspect of this for the most part. I'll get into in my things I'm not crazy about. One of the things I have a problem with. That's pretty much it. But that's really, I think, all you need to know. It's a fantastic story, unbelievably complex plot, really interesting characters, and just the art and animation is chef's kiss. It's beautiful.
Yes.
It's fantastic. Now, having said that, Byron, what didn't you like about it? What didn't work for you?
Well, I wouldn't say I hated this, but like the pacing seemed kind of wonky at certain points. Like those mid there. I'm trying to find a way to describe it that doesn't seem like I'm rambling, but it's just like there were those I feel like scenes like like when they were questioning Hathaway. I feel like they ran a little too long. Or yeah. I feel like I mean, I'm again, I'm a true Blue Gundam fan, but even I know that a war story needs to have more conflict than that.
Yeah.
So when that's
yeah, okay. I'll wait and because I have a similar thought, but it's not quite the same thing. But so
yeah, but that was really it for me. Was like that pacing issue as a whole, because otherwise I enjoyed it.
So I have a couple of quibbles. So let's since you mentioned pacing, let's talk about the pacing. I agree to a certain extent. I didn't have as much of a hard time with it because I thought the characters were interesting enough that it was, there was really good character writing. It was good dialogue and interesting back and forth and so on. And I guess I gave it a little bit of a break because I realized that this is the first movie of a trilogy, and the first one is kind of more setup. It's just always going to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And now that I'm thinking about it, if I were to compare it to another movie and the amount of conflict and physical action and so on, it's not that far off from something as awesome as, say, Rogue One.
Now you mention it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of dialogue and convincing and not convincing and so on and back and forth. Now, obviously, Rogue One is a Star Wars thing, and there's a lot more humor, and there's not very much humor in this. I'll give it that. There's a couple of kind of funny one-liners from some of the some of Hathaway's friends and co-pilots isn't the right word because they're not in the same thing, but other pilots, and that's about it. So I guess that's another knock. It doesn't, now, granted, the original series there isn't a ton of humor either. It's a pretty serious. It's always been a pretty serious
Yes.
thing. But there's that. There aren't a whole lot of moments that are that lighten up the mood, except to be introspective. Because Hathaway does a little bit of soul searching, trying to figure out whether or not his path of his mission is exactly the best one. The other thing, so this quibble that I had, I talked about how much I really like the hard science of it, except when the Gundams fly. Everything uses rocket propulsion or jet propulsion. There's no hovering artificial gravity suspensor, whatever sort of technology. And there's again, there's nothing that controls gravity. So when they're not when they're in space and they're not either under acceleration or spinning, there's no gravity. But when the Gundams are flying, they are accelerating at speeds and, more importantly, changing vectors at speeds that would turn anybody inside the Gundam into human pudding. Now I'm willing to let that go because it's really exciting. But it got worse now that I think about it, looking back at some of the previous stuff that I've actually looked at since. It's gotten kind of worse over the course of the years. So that's a little quibble. I'm willing to forgive it because of how otherwise the show really nails a hard science, in the solar system future. And again, I can make this comparison, but very similar in the nature of the way the Expanse deals with it, although the details are different. The only other thing I have a complaint about is, particularly in the fights which we do see, it's really freaking dark.
Yeah, what I do recall like not being able to get like the best images of these machines.
Right. So there's a couple of times, frankly, it wasn't until I was pulling images for this show where I was 100% sure in any given scene which was the Earth Federation Forces Penelope, and which was Hathaway's G Gundam, XI. And one of the things, the Penelope is pretty brightly colored. Although this, again, so this is during the final fight, and it's taking place like at night or pre-dawn or whatever. So even though Penelope is that brightly colored, it's that dark. And the difference is when you look at the Penelope and G in combat, you can see G is a much darker. You've got grays and dark blues versus the whites and blues and reds of the. It's fairly standard for the Earth Federation Forces stuff. And that made it a little tough. Now, having said that, when they did it right, the first time you actually see the Penelope in action is in mostly a ground combat in Davao. And it looks like that's on your screen right now. The lighting effects, the detail was just insane. And then when Penelope beats the earlier type Gundam that one of Hathaway's pilot friends is piloting, in an attack on Davao that they did, one, to kill more cabinet members, but two, to sort of provide Hathaway with plausible deniability cover. There's a terrorist, folks. There's no question about it. But after Penelope pierces the power center of the Gundam, this is the effect. It's essentially just this fantastic fireworks of sparks.
Lighting.
Oh, yeah, the lighting, the special effects, it's just fantastic. So I wish, even though when, in those darker fights, it's amazing, I wish that it's a little bit more visible. You know, it seemed a little muddy to me at times. And then it's not a complaint so much as that I really want the other movie, the next movie, to come out like right away
Right.
because I want to see where the story with these people go. And I want to see whether or not I'm going to ultimately wind up liking Hathaway. I mean, he's leading a violent terrorist organization. Now, granted, they are violent terrorists against as I said, a pretty crappy version of what was originally a pretty crappy government anyway. I mean, you know, Earth Federation forces, even though they were technically the good guys' side in the first stuff, you know, there was no good guy or bad guy again.
Oh no, never.
Yeah.
Especially in Zeta.
I think I've got a correction here. Jello Soda, welcome to the show. And Jello says Penelope didn't take out the Messer. One of the Earth Federation forces, Gustav Karls, did. All right. I'll buy that. I thought it was Penelope, but you're right. The design doesn't look the same. Now that I think about it, it is a stockier, more rounded design. So good catch, and thank you for keeping us straight. It's still a beautiful sequence. Now, just to make sure that, again, because I found a lot of this really muddy looking at it and really dark, Jello Soda, Penelope did fight against the Messer in the air, though, yeah? And it's only when, you know, and the ground forces, when a bunch of them are taking on the Messer, that the Earth forces, Gustav Karl takes it out. But anyway, it's a detail thing. But let me know if I got that right. If Penelope was involved in that fight and in the air. Because I think at the end of that fight, that's where we first meet Lane, correct? The pilot. Which has the best bad name ever. Lane Aim. How do you not call that lame aim? I mean...
I know, I heard that. I feel like I heard it as lame a couple of times.
Yeah. I mean, luckily it's not. It's a young pilot that Hathaway sees himself in, you know, blah, blah, blah. But his name is Lane.
Rivals.
Yes, they're rivals. But anyway, so those are my only complaints about the muddiness and so on. So Byron, what do you think was the big takeaway from this, the message? You know, what are they trying to tell us? Jello Soda says it was, you're correct. So yes, Penelope was fighting up in the air, and when they wound up down in this park in Davao on the ground, as he points out, it's the Gustav Karls that take out Hathaway's buddy and his Messer. They don't take out his buddy, they take out the Messer. He survives and is captured. But sorry, Byron, yes.
I would say it's the ongoing theme of like all the entire UC mythos, which is that conflict is inevitable. Like there might be peace for a time. There might be like there may be moments where like everything seems fine, but as long as there is unrest, there will be conflict.
Yep. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that maybe it's also adding on to that you know. So let's say war is hell, but you're gonna get it anyway. You know, because and Tomino has said this, that's one of the things that he wanted to show about this, that you know, as Byron has said before, the sort of gung ho, you know, early mecha stuff, good guys versus bad guys, isn't really the way war happens. And that, you know, this is as much as it is a militarists or a military fans kind of wet dream type of series. If you go on any of the wikis, they literally list the full name of like every support vehicle. You know, well, and one, because the Gunplas have those full names, you know, when you build the models and so on. But you know, clearly it's, you know, it's the, you know, it's the vehicles and the weaponry that, you know, draws an awful lot of people to this. But while they're doing that, Tomino is giving them a story, because this is, by the way, this is based on novels that he wrote way back in like '89. So it's a trio of novels that's called Hathaway's Flash. Or it's Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway's Flash. So in some translations into English, this is called not just Hathaway, but Hathaway's Flash at the end. That Tomino was trying to, tell even those, fans of military vehicles and so on that, sure, they all look cool. War is horrible. War is horrible to people. It's horrible to nations. It's horrible to the planet. It's just an awful, awful thing. And, I think he's probably trying to tell us that it kind of sucks that it's going to be around forever. So that's my takeaway on this so far. Now that may change, and I think it might with the next two movies. Because it'll be interesting to see whether or not this comes down on one side or the other about the morality of Hathaway's tactics. Generally people don't like terrorists. And it'd be interesting to see. All right, folks, that is it. That is our show. We're going to wrap up with our conclusions. Byron, is it a recommendation? And on that scale of 1 to 10, where does it sit?
Well, I would definitely give it a 7 out of 10, just because it's an incomplete story. But I recommend it if you are a fan of Gundam. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's more UC Gundam. It's more Gundam.
So yeah, if you're a Gundam fan, it's more Gundam. Well said. So you literally took the words right out of my mouth for my numerical rating and why. It's 7 out of 10. It could go higher or lower, depending on what the next two movies.
Exactly.
By itself, stand alone, right now it's a 7 out of 10. And I'll try to do that with the other movies when they do come out. Is try to keep my analysis of or my rating of them just about that specific movie. Although it's going to be a little bit harder now that we've already had one in the can. Mm-hmm. And I would give it a recommendation whether you're a Gundam fan or not, because I think the world is so intricate, the characters are so well written, the animation is just so outstandingly gorgeous that I would say watch it. If you find it too confusing, my apologies. I didn't, as somebody who, again, I didn't know a ton about the franchise until I watched this. So it wasn't that difficult to follow. But yeah, if you are a Gundam fan, absolutely watch this. It's outstanding. It's beautiful to watch. If nothing else, you're going to have, eye candy for days.
Indeed.
All right, that's it, folks. Thank you all for joining us. If you get a chance, and you would, shoot on over to Patreon, patreon.com/nerdcaliber to check out our Patreon page. We just got a couple of very low dollar tiers. Essentially, all we're doing is asking you to help us get to more cons, cover cons, if cons come back. I've been saying for months, when cons come back.
Not looking so good.
You're making it tough. But if cons come back, we want to get out there and cover more of them. And tomorrow night, also at 8 o'clock, our Nerd Week Live, Nerd News Show. We got a bunch of topics. It's not nearly as busy as the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks have been insane. But there are still some stuff, and there's more follow-on to the Activision Blizzard. That's a story that's just not going to stop.
The Activision Blizzard poop Blizzard.
Yes, the Activision blank storm type Blizzard. And then of course our full fat spoiler chat coming up on Thursday is, well, what else? It's the Suicide Squad. Yes. Very much looking forward to talking about that.
Same.
And I recommend go check this out, folks. It's really good.
Go see Suicide Squad as well.
And Suicide Squad, yes. Spoiler for our spoiler alert. I'm going to say, well, if you've read my review on nerdcaliber.com, you know what I think about it. So it's a spoiler-free review, by the way, folks. So if you haven't seen it, go check out the review, nerdcaliber.com. It's going to be on one of the first links in there. Mm-hmm. So that said, Byron, give us a goodbye.
Hey guys, Byron McNeil, aka Byron D0. Check me out on my YouTube channel yet again. It's Byron D0.
There you go.
BYRONDZERO. Have a good
Awesome.
night.
And again, from us at Nerd Caliber, have a good night, folks. Stay safe, please, please, and please, do get that vaccination. We got to get this knocked down. I want to go to cons. If if you have seen the Suicide Squad, go watch Mr. Sunday Movies video about the two end credit scenes, because it's a 5-minute video. The first 2.5 minutes are about the end credit scenes, and the next 2.5 minutes are him going ballistic on people who are not getting vaccinated. And it's one of the funniest and honestly most heartfelt things you're going to hear. Lots of profanity though. So stay safe, folks.